Well then, folks, yesterday was day one, and of course we took a dive into all of the beginning introductory things like the application process and, just kind of some expectations for Zoom and attendance, the final exam and all those fun-filled things. Of course, we talked about the different resources and how to navigate them. We looked at the Real Estate Commission's website. And then we got into a little bit of learning, and that's where we're going to pick back up. And so, as I said, everything that we're going to learn in this class is going to follow your online program and that 2023 syllabus, with the exception of what we're in now. And I kind of explained yesterday why. What we're in now is kind of a crash course in some very heavily testable North Carolina items. And the North Carolina section of the test being the more difficult section, to say the least. And so I like to introduce it, just rip the Band-Aid right off the bat and introduce you to some of these very heavily testable concepts. Why? Because then when I teach it again later, you at least have it buried in your brains somewhere. And so am I expecting you to be absolute experts on everything I'm going to teach you between yesterday and today, maybe a little bit tomorrow? No. But you'll realize too that as I teach you a concept for the first time, that concept will also tie into another concept, will tie into another concept. So then you'll find that when we get way down the road to like contracts, I'll start explaining how contracts now intertwines with, being a broker in North Carolina or agency, or whether you need a license, or, they all kind of connect to each other. So think of it like layers that we just got to build on and build on and build on. So the biggest lesson that we finally, got into last night before we wrapped up the day was, when is a license required in North Carolina? Now, what was the acronym that I told y'all for brokerage activities? What was the acronym?
llbeans.
llbeans, right? Just like the clothing store, but with an S on the end, which is your list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell. Now, that's not enough standing as a standalone, and here's why, folks. If you help somebody sell a car, you don't need a real estate broker's license, okay? So that's why, aside from those brokerage activities, we also had to add in those other three kickers, right? Dealing with what? What were the three that had to be present for a license to be required?
It had to be real property, it had to be for others, and for compensation.
There you go. Real property, for others, for compensation. Now, don't get so caught up in the word real property. As I said, right now, if it makes you more comfortable, you can think the word real estate, but you'll realize real property, real estate, for all intents and purposes, for the sake of this class, under most circumstances, they mean the same thing. So dealing with real estate or real property for somebody other than yourself for compensation. And even one of those was missing, you don't need a license. Okay, those are the triggers. And then, of course, remember when we're dealing with the llbeans activities, it's if you do those things, offer to do those things, or refer to do those things. And so that's where people get confused is, they're like, oh, well, I can get a referral fee, right? That's fine. No, an unlicensed person cannot collect a referral fee because that would constitute brokerage activity. And so we got into some of these really big named exemptions that are exceptionally testable. And so this first one that we talked about was an employee of an entity owner, right? A corporation, a partnership, a limited liability company, something like that. If that entity owns real estate, any employee of that entity could be the ones facilitating the sale. And it basically falls under the same exemption of for sale by owner, because it's that entity selling that entity's property. All employees, all owners, all managers would be part of that entity. Do not confuse that with, oh, I own a property and I'm going to hire somebody else to manage it for me. No, because now it's real property for others for compensation, and that person would need a license. The other exemption on this list that we got into, and this hit home for a lot of you who are, Lord, the most property managers that I've ever seen in a pre-licensing class simultaneously, right? There's just a lot of you. I did property management. I'm doing property management. I'm getting back into property management. There's a lot of you. I'll tell you the other profession that I get a lot in these classes. I'm not trying to, but I get a lot of teachers and medical workers. Like those are like always up there, right? People who are in some facet of real estate, like property management, and teachers and medical workers. Why? Teachers are underpaid and overworked, and medical workers are paid well but exceptionally overworked. And so I think that there's some consistency in these these jobs where I see a lot of certain buckets coming through, and I get it. So the second one was the property managers, more specifically the employees of a broker property manager. And so that's what I told you. When you go to a leasing office at an apartment complex, you're typically dealing with one of these two exemptions, one or two, but two is not a full-fledged exemption. We said it's a partial exemption. That employee of the broker property manager can do very specific things. They can collect rent checks. They can collect tenant security deposit checks. They can answer basic tenant questions. They can give them a lease to sign, not negotiate, but sign, things of that nature. But they cannot negotiate. They cannot do brokerage activity. They can't show properties for sale. They can't hold open houses, none of that jazz. And then the last one, the easiest way to think about it is court appointed. Anything court appointed, right? Attorneys doing attorney jobs don't need a license. But then also trustees, guardians, executors, attorneys, in fact, anybody who is court appointed. And the example I gave you yesterday was Britney Spears and her conservatorship and her father being the guardian of that. It would look like he was doing real property for others for compensation, but because he was in that court appointed conservatorship, he was exempt. He wouldn't need a license as well. Now, a couple other, kind of pieces of clarity here, and then I'll, show you the supplemental pieces that may or may not come up. When we're dealing, I'm sorry, Tara, what you got?
You mentioned yesterday about a firm license. So the entities that these people are employed at, does the entity always have to have a firm license?
No, because they're not doing brokerage, they're doing it for themselves. So think back to the Microsoft example. Microsoft does not have a firm license. A firm license is for somebody who wants to do real property for others for compensation, right? Remax, Century 21, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker. Those are needing a firm license because they're doing brokerage and getting paid for it. But Microsoft doesn't need a firm license because Microsoft is selling Microsoft's property. Just like Tara can sell Tara's property, Tara can manage Tara's property. It's the same thing as a for sale by owner or a managing it yourself kind of situation. They don't need a license. Does that make sense? It's a good question. Yeah. So here's the piece of clarification, though, and I kind of told you, folks, when I'm dealing with the employee of an entity, they do have to be an employee, W-2, salaried, on the books, manager, something like that. They cannot be a 1099, meaning an independent contractor, okay? That would not fit that mold because an independent contractor would have to be licensed. Now, in the way of like paying them some type of bonus, the commission's not going to get into that. And I kind of explained yesterday because it's a full-fledged exemption. The company selling their own property would arguably make more money by not having to pay a broker. What they do with that money is their problem as a business. The commission doesn't deal with that because it's not brokerage activity. Of course, they do care if that other one that we talked about, the employee of a broker property manager, they're not supposed to be paid on a transactional lease volume, anything like that, because they are not a full-fledged exemption. So this is just some supplemental info on the two that we just mentioned. Now, I kind of showed you yesterday. Let me see if I can find it relatively quickly. I think I still have it pulled up somewhere. Yeah. I showed you yesterday how this kind of correlates in the license law and commission rulebook, and I showed you that the secondary parts of 93A-2 are the exemptions. So here's where it talks about the llbeans and who needs a license. And when you get into the actual exemptions, their very first one right here is the entity owner, employee of the entity owner, but there's a lot of sub pieces. So it's basically saying officers, employees, W-2, general partners, managers. This is all part of that same exemption. It just goes on and gives a lot of different examples of who would be exempt under this entity owner. But then it goes into the other ones that we're kind of naming. Any person acting as an attorney in fact, anybody acting as an attorney under their authority as an attorney, any person while acting as a receiver, trustee, bankruptcy, guardian, administrator, once again, court appointed, any person while acting as a trustee under a written trust agreement, yet again, court appointed, any salaried person employed by a licensed real estate broker, employee of a broker property manager, and then the last couple, any individually who personally sells or leases their property, you doing it, not for others. And then the last one that is kind of one of those easy to forget about ones is an HOA. So being a president, vice president, or a member of your HOA, you're dealing with real estate. You may be putting liens on properties. You may be dealing with trust accounts, but they are named as an exemption. So that's when it says any housing authority, means an HOA. They do not have to have a license. You don't have to be a licensed broker to be a member of your HOA. So those are the exemptions. And like I said, it's going to be a very big testable category on the North Carolina portion of here's the scenario. Did this person need a license or did they not? And so I'm going to give you a few more examples as we get a little bit deeper into this before we move on into other things. This is just that same excerpt that you just saw. Nothing that you need to read off that slide. And then this is also just kind of going in and talking about the things that an unlicensed person can do versus what they can't do. And it details that in the License on Commission rulebook a little bit more. And I'll give you some deeper examples as well. What you got, Bree?
Is the HOA covered under that third point of attorneys and trustees? Is that something completely different?
No, it was something completely different. It was number 7 or 8, I think, right here. It was this one. Any housing authority organized in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 157 of General Statutes and any regularly salaried employees of housing authorities when performing acts authorized in this chapter. This is housing authorities specifically named as an exemption. And we'll just condense it to HOAs. Most people don't know them as housing authorities, but HOAs. So as I told you, the employee of the broker property manager could, show properties for lease, could answer basic tenant questions, yada, yada, yada. There is, of course, another facet of employees in the real estate world, folks. Not everybody does property management with their license. There's a vast majority of us who do sales, whether it be residential or commercial. And sometimes even people in sales capacities will employ employees as assistants. And there is still kind of the similar guidance on what they can and can't do. And so this is just a generalized thumbs up. These are okay for an unlicensed person to do as an employee because it's not brokerage. What it comes down to is any administrative, clerical, laborious tasks are always okay. Receiving and forwarding phone calls, assisting with compiling listing documents, obtaining keys, placing lock boxes for sale signs, acting as a courier, scheduling appointments, so on and so forth. All labor things are fine. Can't go into that brokerage territory, but all of these are okay. Now, one of the ones that also gets students a little bit confused on, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, when we're dealing with what we call trust monies, and you may not know what that is yet, and don't stress about it. In North Carolina, the broker in charge is responsible for handling the trust monies, but it is okay for an employee under their supervision to also maintain and deposit money because they're under the direct supervision of the broker in charge. Now, we're going to talk more about that later, so don't panic on that one yet. What you got, James?
So, it's okay for a non-licensed person to submit forms into MLS, answer phone calls, act as a courier. But is it permissible for an unlicensed person under the supervision of a broker to lead an open house?
No.
Why not?
Because the law says so. Let me rephrase that. When you say under the supervision, let's say, James, I'm holding an open house this weekend and you want to tag along, you're welcome to. There's no problem there because I'm holding the open house and you're helping me. But you cannot go and hold the open house in North Carolina without me. That would be illegal brokerage activity. And I'm glad you brought this question up, James, because I'm going to tell you a funny story. You ready for this? Once upon a time, I had a license in the state of Colorado as well as the state of North Carolina. Well, folks, let me tell you why. Okay, here's the funny part of this. I've never even been to Colorado. I hear it's nice, but I've never been there. So some of you are probably wondering, why does this Yutz have a license in the state of Colorado if he's never even been there? I'll tell you why. Because I'm a nerd and I love teaching. And so here's the thing. At one point, I Googled what the most difficult broker's license to get was. And I expected North Carolina to be up there at the tippy top because they say we're pretty hard, but it was Colorado was the hardest to get. And I think they have to do like 200 hours of education. Now, James, hang tight. There's a point to this story, I promise. Okay, there always is. So here's the thing. I have never studied any of Colorado's laws or rules, but I wanted to take their exam, and as a good test taker and a cocky person, I'm like, I can pass this. And so I took their national portion and their state portion. They're bifurcated, meaning separated, just like in North Carolina. And of course, I aced the national. I missed 2 questions, and it was just poorly worded questions, in my opinion. Semantics, whatever. But here's what I realized when I was taking the Colorado state portion of the exam. Their laws are vastly different than ours. And so about halfway through the test, I had to change the way I was answering because I got context clues from it that I'm like, oh, this is probably okay. So case in point, James, in Colorado, it is completely acceptable for an unlicensed person to hold an open house as long as the seller agrees to it. But in North Carolina, it would be illegal brokerage activity. And this is where I told you there is such differentiations from state to state, which is why we have these different state exams, if you will. But it does make it very difficult to teach because, you know, when there's resources out there talking about all the differences in states, it gets very confusing very fast. And so at the end of the day, it's just because of the way that our laws are written that is, in our opinion, a brokerage activity. Only a broker can do it. But some states allow it. And this goes back to the other point I made yesterday, right? Is in North Carolina, you folks could ask for the buyer agency commission as an unrepresented buyer today. And you could be paid it in North Carolina. But in other states, it'd be illegal just because of the way their laws are written. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, we'll never understand why, right? It's just written that way.
Right. I mean, because normally during the open house, you're not talking about, like, you're not negotiating money. You're not negotiating upgrades or all that stuff. Like, there's nothing that requires a license.
Well, and sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does. I mean, you're right. Most people just come in and like, I just want to see the pretty house, and they come in and they leave. And we're going to be having some very detailed conversations about what triggers some things there. But sometimes it does go further. Well, who's listing this house? Well, what can you tell me? Why are the sellers moving? Sometimes it can get into some very, what we'll call confidential territory right now, which would be a broker's territory, because there are certain disclosure brokerage laws that we're going to get into later. Yeah, good question. Anthony, what you got?
So I just had a quick question because I know you were talking about state to state. What I wanted to know is when it comes to having your realtor license, and because everything's different state by state, if you were, say you wanted to become an international realtor, would you have to take a test for every single state that you wanted to partake in?
So you just mean national, like across the country? Yes, because like international, you're gonna have to learn some languages. You're gonna be doing a lot of flying. But yeah, nationally, yes. The short answer is yes. The thing is, there is no one size fits all. If you decide that you want to get a license in another state, you literally have to go and research them, because there are some states right here, right now. Case in point, Colorado. I didn't have to take the class because I was licensed in North Carolina. And I actually wasn't required to take the national portion of the exam. I just elected to do it. I only had to take their portion of their exam, and they gave me a license. So it really depends on the state. Some recognize what we call reciprocity, where you'll just have to take a test. Others will not even require you to take a test. They'll just give you the license if you apply for it. But there's no one size fits all. It just depends on which states you want to go in. Now, the thing is, Anthony, we're going to have some conversations later. Even in North Carolina, it's not always a good idea to go outside of your geographic level of competence, because if you don't know what you're doing and you get in trouble, you can lose your license. And you're talking about doubling dues, doubling fees, doubling, all kinds of things. So it's not always a good idea unless you're spending a lot of time in both of those states, but it is a possibility. Yeah. So much like those are okays, here's the no-goes, right? And these are, like I said, just kind of a in passing conversation right now of what would not be okay. Of course, showing properties to prospective buyers is a no-go. As James just asked, hosting open houses without a broker present, no-go in North Carolina. That's not okay. Answering consumer questions about properties that are too specific, no. No offering of opinions or counsel, no ordering or supervising major repairs, no negotiations, no cold calling and soliciting business. They can make phone calls, but the phone call is limited to, hey, do you want to speak to my boss? If they say, have you ever thought about buying or selling, or, I saw your listing was expired or something like that, that's a brokerage activity because they're directly soliciting business. So certain things okay, certain things not okay for unlicensed persons. Now let's go back into the real property for others for compensation. And what we said, if you're missing one piece, a license is not required, which is why a for sale by owner can exist. People can sell their homes, people can manage their homes because they're not for others. And I even stated you could purchase a home potentially and even request part of the compensation to go to you as an unlicensed person. And in North Carolina, it would be okay. So this is the extended list, and I already showed you this list in the License Law and Commission Rulebook. So let me ask you a couple of questions, or let me make a comment and then ask you to answer a few more examples, should I say. Folks, you've got to understand how literal, and let me tell you why this is a very important thing to burn in your brains right now. There are very few absolutes in this real estate course. Very few, but I'm not going to say none. And so typically on a test question, if it says something like always or never, that's probably not going to be the answer because there's very few absolutes. But when I'm talking about compensation, there is no exception to that trigger, right? Real property for others for compensation. I told you $1 would be compensation. A gift card for $5 would be compensation. Use of a car, use of a house, anything of value would be compensation. There are zero exceptions to that. There's no exceptions for the others being friends or family members. So I'm going to teach you about a lot of exceptions with other concepts, but right here, right now, you better understand there are no exceptions for this others and this compensation. If it's so much as $1, and it doesn't matter if it's a family member or anybody else, if it's real property for others for compensation, a license was required. So let me ask you a couple questions here to make sure you're feeling comfortable still on these concepts. True or false? An unlicensed property owner can compensate an unlicensed person to show rental property and collect rent on their behalf if the licensed person does not negotiate on behalf of the owner. So when you are faced with some like this that are not screamingly obvious, apply the criteria. llbeans. Well, folks, that's a leasing activity. They're showing a property for rent and collecting rent. That's leasing, so that's a brokerage activity. And this person owns it, but they're having this person show it and collect the rent, and they're going to pay them, and it deals with real property. And so it's real property for others for compensation. They would need a license. This is not okay. It's a leasing activity. You've got to be able to apply them, and these get tricky, but you've got to think about it. And this is where I told you, an individual owner is not the same as an entity owner. So don't get those confused because it's an individual hiring somebody. Well, W-2 wouldn't be any different because once again, it comes down to entity. If the entity owned it and the entity had an employee. But if this individual created a separate entity and then hired you there, it still would not be okay because the individual owns the property, not the entity. Yeah. Let me explain something too, and this is going to be a recurring theme throughout this class, folks. The difference between an employee and an independent contractor. Most of you are probably employees somewhere, which means you're W-2, which means they can require you to work a schedule, which means they take taxes out, which means they may sometimes offer you benefits, have to pay employment taxes, all these different things. That's an employee. An independent contractor, typically a 1099, is somebody paid on a transactional or commission basis. The big difference is you can't require a schedule of a 1099 person. They are self-employed. And in the real estate world, the vast majority of us as real estate brokers, we are self-employed. We are 1099. Yeah, we'll use generic terms like, oh, we work for Keller Williams, work for Coldwell Banker, work for Remax, right? We'll say that, but we don't really work for them. It's what we call an affiliation. It's a partnership. But we're independent contractors working our own schedule. And so when I say employees in this exemption, it means employee. You're on the books. They are actually paying you W-2, withholding taxes, all that fun-filled jazz. That doesn't happen to brokers. But of course, we can do brokerage activity because we have a license. Now, here's an interesting scenario, and I'm going to see what you think about it first, and then, of course, I'll take a deeper dive and explain it to make sure you understand it, because this is a very big and kind of testable one. So here's the scenario. We've got Ashley as an on-site employee of ABC Builders Incorporated. She is paid an annual salary of $90,000. She meets with potential buyers to show them homes, help them select floor plans, choose options, and prepare purchase agreements. Would Ashley need a North Carolina real estate license? Got a smattering of yeses, nos, and additional questions in the chat. Okay, so here's the piece of it. Folks, let's talk about builders for a second. Builders go out and buy dirt, and so then they own the dirt. And then builders will go out and get loans to buy materials, and they will build homes on the dirt that they own. So you answer the question for me. Who owns the house?
Builders.
The builders. The bank has a lien against it, but the builder owns the house. The builder owns the house. And so who is Ashley?
The employee.
The employee, which means who is Ashley?
Employee with the builder.
She is the builder. Because ABC Builders owns it. Ashley is an employee of ABC Builders. That is ABC Builders selling ABC Builders property. Does Ashley need a license? No. It is no different than Raphael selling Raphael's property, Beverly selling Beverly's property. And folks, this is the interesting thing about builders in North Carolina, the way these rules are written. If you walk into a new construction community, flip a coin. You may be talking to an employee of the builder who is not a licensed broker. You may be talking to a licensed broker. The reason being that a builder would pick one over the other, the definition between employee and independent contractor. If they treat them as employees, they have to take out taxes. They have to pay them wages. They have to provide them insurance. They have to do a lot of things if they're employees. So a lot of builders will elect to just hire real estate brokers who are independent contractors, and we're not employees. But we can do this stuff because we're brokers, right? That we have a license. But Ashley doesn't need one because she is an extension of the builder. But it's one or the other, right? You got to pick one as the builder and you got to run with it. So does she need a license? No. What you got, Bree?
But for this instance, Ashley doesn't get the same, I guess, full benefits as a broker because she can't be compensated, right? Like she can't be commissioned or bonus for the amount of.
Here's the thing, though. Remember I told you, this is a business doing stuff for themselves. The commission's not going to get involved in her. They could pay her a bonus. Who's going to stop them? It'd be like you paying yourself more money from your transaction directly when you sold your own house. Nobody's going to get involved in that. That's a business's income, and that's a business's employee. If they wanted to give her a bonus, nobody can stop them. The time that it would not be allowed is the lease volume of an employee of a broker property manager, because the commission would have something to say about that. But do you understand what I'm saying? This is a full-fledged exemption. So yeah, she's getting paid $90,000 a year. If the builder wanted to give her quarterly bonuses of $10,000, they could. As an employee, who's going to stop them? It's a full-fledged exemption. Now, the difference is it's all or nothing, right? If she's an employee, they're taking out taxes. They have a schedule for her. That's the full shebang, right? Yeah. Cynthia, what you got?
In this scenario, can you able to twist the question?
Is he able to what?
Can you able to twist this question? So instead of a straightforward, Ashley is working with the ABC builder, correct? Is it way you can able to twist the questions for the testing purpose?
I'm sorry.
You can ask something like indirectly. Can you able to add some other points here whether you can you able to twist this questions, different way.
Pose this question a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
You mean like what would it look like on a test question? Is that what you're getting at here?
That's a scenario like that. In the scenario, so how you can ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, the question is going to be very similar to this, but of course with multiple choices on a test question. And so it would say something like, Synthel works for Blue Ridge Building Company. He regularly shows properties to potential buyers and negotiates contracts and has them sign, agreements on behalf of the builder. Does Synthel need a broker's license? And then the answer choices would be no, because Synthel is an employee of the builder and an exemption. Yes, because Synthel is doing brokerage activity. No, because Synthel, is only doing one deal per year. Or yes, because you see what I'm saying? Like they'll give you a scenario and then they'll give you options. You got to pick the best answer of no, because it's exempt because he's an employee of the builder and the builder owns the properties. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So this is one that absolutely comes up a lot. They love to play on the builder scenario because this is a very common occurrence in North Carolina. I mean, I'm not going to say it's the most common. More builders than not do hire brokers, and that's their prerogative. But they could do it this way as well because it would be employees of entity owners. Let me give you another scenario here. We got Tom lives in one of his grandparents' triplex units for free. In exchange, he manages the other 2 units. He deals with the tenants, orders repairs, collects the rents, etc. Is this an acceptable setup, or would Tom need a license? I got mostly consistent in the chat. Folks, let's just play the game here, okay? He is dealing with tenants, he's collecting rents, he's ordering repairs, he's doing things. That's leasing activity. Can we all agree that living somewhere is something of value? Folks, I wish this was my grandparents. That's some swanky little triplexes right there. Single-handedly, the most expense we all have monthly is probably our housing expense. I'd say there's something of value here. And so it is not Tom's house, it's his grandparents. So for others, it is real property. There is something of value, and he's doing leasing. He needs a license. In this relationship, he is doing illegal brokerage activities. Everybody with me? It is real property for others for compensation. Don't get so literal on compensation. Living somewhere is something of value. It absolutely is. You've got to be able to apply these criteria because I'm telling you, there's a lot of these on the test, and these eat students alive. Is this the only time you're going to hear it? No. But it's a good foundational time to implement it. What you got, Gerald?
Yeah, just go back to the Ashley question. I guess what threw me off was preparing the purchase agreement. She's not allowed to negotiate the terms of the purchase, right?
Sure she is. Sure she is. Yeah, and here's why. So, Gerald, you missed night 1 last night, and so we touched on a couple of these things, but let me explain this to you. A for sale by owner is a full-fledged exemption. Do you agree? Like, Gerald, can you sell your house right now without a license? Sure. So let's say that you've listed your house for sale, and I'm a prospective buyer who's unlicensed and I want to buy it. Who's going to show me the house?
Myself.
Yourself. And so then when we start talking about money, who's going to negotiate with me?
Myself as well.
Yourself as well. You see how that works? So Ashley is an extension of ABC Builders. It's ABC Builders negotiating ABC Builders property. Of course you can negotiate. It's the same thing as you negotiating as a for sale by owner. It's just ABC Builders is the for sale by owner, and she's an extension of ABC Builders.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. So it's the distinctions for doing it for others.
Yep, it's not for others. That's exactly right. Okay. Just like if you're managing your own property, you're going to negotiate the lease terms. That's okay. It's your property. Yep. Good question. So this scenario, Tom absolutely needs a license. Now, folks, what we call this is illegal brokerage activity. So the questions are always going to be, did they need a license? And the answer here is yes. Or the other answer that you may get is this illegal brokerage activity? Also yes, right? This would constitute illegal brokerage activity if you did these things without a license. What you got, Jack?
Just adding on to the previous example with ABC Building, since it's the same as me selling my own house by owner, does that mean like she wouldn't be able to list it on the MLS since she's not an agent, or could it go on MLS?
That's a really good question. The general rule of thumb is you have to meet certain criteria to be able to join the MLS and list it on there. So it's not universal, unfortunately, Jack. There is some rules and there's some really weird stuff happening in the MLS world right now that we're not going to get into for the sake of this class. But the short answer is she's probably not going to be able to list it on the MLS because you typically have to be a realtor in order to gain access to the MLS, and only brokers are realtors. So, yeah. Yeah, good question. So let me give you one other scenario, and this is more like an example test question because I'm giving you multiple choice here. So I'm not going to say a word. I'm going to let you read it, and then when you find the answer, you put it in the chat, and then I'll read it, and we'll kind of make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. Here is your question. So I got a smattering of different answers here. So let's just go through this piece by piece, okay? The question is, Betty is a licensed real estate broker in North Carolina who is managing an apartment complex. She's brainstorming ways to attract new tenants. Which of the following would not be allowable as a promotion? Now, folks, let me give you a little bit of a lesson, and we're going to talk about these in later sections as well. But let me give you a lesson on test-taking ability. You're going to see questions like this that say which is or which is not. This is commonly referred to as a Boolean style question. You don't need to know that word. It's just a statistical thing. What that means is every single answer has only one of two possible values. It's either true or false, or in other words, it is okay or it's not okay. Well, since we're looking for the thing that's not allowable, that means three of these are allowable and one is not. And so you're looking for the outlier. One of these things is not like the other. And if you remember that, folks, you'll see later that sometimes remembering that strategy can help you answer the question even if you don't know what the actual answer is. Because if you know what three things are true, by default, you can find that one that stands out. So let's look through these. A says 2 free months rent for any new tenant who signs a 1-year lease. Folks, that's completely okay. Because it is real property. There's something of value. It's your lease. You are the tenant signing the lease. So don't need a license. So A is okay. B, a free month's rent given to any current tenants who recommend a friend to sign a 1-year lease. So you referred somebody to lease, real property. It's not you, and you're getting something of value. That's not allowable. You would have to have a license to be able to collect that referral fee. So B is the not allowable promotion. Let's just play it out though. C, reducing the price of the 3-bedroom apartments. Folks, people do that all the time. If they can't sell it for, lease it for $2,500 a month, they may drop it to $2,300. That has nothing to do with needing a license. That's completely allowable. And then the last one, D, offering a $200 or $250 referral fee to any licensed real estate agent who brings a tenant that signs a lease. Folks, some of you missed this. That's the whole point of being licensed. We can be paid referral fees. That is the whole purpose of you sitting in this class. I can get paid brokerage commissions. I can get paid referral fees. I can do all that stuff. Why? I have a license. It legally allows me to do real property for others for compensation. Does that make sense? So it's absolutely allowable for somebody to pay a referral fee to an agent for bringing a tenant. And this actually happens. It's not very common with big apartment complexes, but people who are renting single-family detached homes and townhouses, they'll put them in the MLS just like we will houses for sale. And I won't get into why, but they still offer compensation when they say, well, hey, you bring us a tenant, we'll cut you a $600 check for helping us find a tenant. It happens all the time. Can I reiterate why B is a no-go? Sure, I can. Because a free month's rent given to a current tenant who recommends a friend that signs a 1-year lease. And so what we're saying is, Bree, you live in apartment 101B. And the apartment complex is saying, well, Bree, if you refer somebody to live in this apartment complex, refer somebody to lease, that person's not you. They're leasing real property, and I'm sending you or giving you something of value, a free month of rent. So that triggers real property for others for compensation. You cannot accept that legally. Does that make sense? Yeah. You got to be able to apply those 3 criteria every time. What you got, James?
So instead of it, I understand that it's illegal. So, but it would be asking the tenant to illegally engage in brokerage activities and expect a referral or a referral compensation of some sort, correct?
Yes. And understand, too, that the apartment complex and the tenant are both in violation of license law. Paying the referral fee illegally and receiving the referral fee illegally are both violation. Folks, if you violate license law, it's actually a Class 1 misdemeanor. It's part of North Carolina general statutes. Now, more often than not, it starts with a cease and desist letter, but if they cared enough, they can prosecute somebody criminally for unlawful brokerage activities. Yeah. So, of course, B is the one that is not allowed. The other 3 are completely okay. And that just goes back to applying those different criteria there.